I'd now like to introduce to our first speaker who will be framing the day, Jannah Bierens. Jannah Bierens is a Black biracial North Carolina native who uses feminine and gender non-conforming pronouns. As a racial and health equity consultant, she consults and facilitates dialogue around the root causes of oppression, intersectionality, and power imbalance for narrative shifting and systems change toward advancing racial and health inequity. Along with their MPH from Benedict University, they have graduate certificates in health management, policy, and health education and promotion. In addition to her MA in social justice and community organizing from Prescott College, Ms. Bierens has spent most of their 20-year career in Durham, North Carolina, at the local government public health level, driven by a deep passion for eliminating historically rooted Black health disparities. As a health education specialist, she educated, advocated, and organized around opportunities and success to optimal health in communities with residents who have been traditionally marginalized by design. They hold a strong belief that collective injustice and healing are critical to centering shared humanity, realizing our bound liberation and improvement in health outcomes for all. Currently residing in Lansing, Michigan when they're not working, Ms. Bierens finds joy in music, reading, writing, and all things creative.
Peace and greetings, beautiful humans. My name is Jannah Bierens, and it is such an honor to set the stage for your time together today. While I've grown to not believe in gender binaries as I've learned and unlearned throughout the years, I do acknowledge my socialization using both feminine and gender non-conforming pronouns. Technically, I am biracial with a Black mother and white father. However, culturally, socially, and politically, I rock out in life as a Black woman. More importantly, I am very proud to have been raised by the wisdom and invaluable life lessons of generations of Black superwomen. I am a larger bodied human with light, fair skin, curly, thick Black hair, brown eyes, and gap teeth, and I'm currently wearing some Black rimmed glasses. I am also wearing bright colors because color brings me joy, and I believe in finding joy in my justice work as part of my self-care, as part of sustainability. Behind me are the folks that have my back at all times. It's a bookshelf with a few of the Black scholars, activists, and authors who have been part of my journey of self-love, healing, and liberation, including but not limited to James Baldwin, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, and Angela Davis, just to name a few. I stand firmly on the shoulders of those who came before me as women and as Black people to make it possible for me to be sitting before you right now. Now I am about to share my screen as we continue on our journey before you get into the real good stuff of the day. Now, I have to start out by just saying that I am a North Carolina native and I'm brand new to Michigan. I relocated last fall, but I would like to acknowledge that I reside and commute on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Peoria, Anishinaabe-Waki, Odawa, and Mississauga people. I would also like to recognize Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations for historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, for Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands historically. Currently, I am a racial and health equity consultant. And the last 2 decades of my career and my life's work is rooted in my passion for understanding and reversing Black health disparities. And while racism has just recently been named a public health crisis and a threat, I got into public health because, from my perspective, Black health has always been a justice issue since the founding of this country. Racism, specifically anti-Black racism and its byproducts, has robbed us of our shared humanity and our shared liberation. Racism is not new to me, nor many of my Black colleagues and the Black scholars and researchers that I've been learning from since my undergrad studies that began in the late 1990s as I was learning about exercise science and the anatomy of the body. In 2003, I was 23 years old when this wonderful human Dr. Kamara Jones did a keynote talk on structural racism at the UNC Minority Health Conference, one of my favorite career annual events. Next month, I'll be 42, just to give you some history context around the length of time that has passed. And while I had no idea back then, a few years into my career, that I would land where I am right now, I could carry this torch that I believe was first lit by Dr. Kamara Jones. So I always try to center her definition of racism, which is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on social interpretation of how one looks. It unfairly disadvantages some people and communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and overall saps the strength of our whole society, wasting our human resources, innovation, and creativity. There are 3 types and levels of racism that Dr. Kamara Jones does talk about, and I think they're all very important, but for purposes of a lot of the work that's going on currently within organizations and institutions, we are going to focus on the structural and institutional racism, which has been founded in this country's DNA. But I want to expound upon this definition, and I bring in the Racial Equity Institute's definition to understand that racism is also this social and institutional power combined with race prejudice. It is a system of advantage for those considered white and of oppression for those who are not considered white. And so more specifically, it is a white supremacy system. So when I use the term white supremacy, I'm not talking about the Ku Klux Klan or alt-right groups, but I'm talking about a system in which white is considered superior. And in order for a group of people to be superior, others must be inferior. And although we didn't build this house, we inherited it. So we need to understand how it was built if we want to dismantle the systems that are really causing havoc for all of humankind. I think that it's important to also state that until we name it, we cannot normalize it. And until we normalize it, we will continue to negotiate the importance of addressing racism and its byproducts. I am bringing up a brief history timeline. Unfortunately, we are not given the tools for racial exploration. We also don't learn our history in a way that makes sense around the fine print. But it's important to consider exploration of education. And when I say exploration, I mean exploring this country and its history with an understanding that we are part of this global context as well. But I don't have enough time in the day to go there, so I'll just keep it very brief here. But with this foundation, we can connect the dots to how our current society structure is set up and also positions us. Where do we fall on this spectrum as we explore ourselves and our history and where we came in within this arrangement? Here you can see the backdrop of the Black American experience with the institution of chattel slavery. And then even after abolition of enslavement, we had Black codes, which were modeled after slave codes, which then turned into Jim Crow racial separation and segregation, along with a patchwork of policies that really what I call is the legacy of lockout and have kept a control of the Black mind and body. And also on this timeline, we see these other enactments that were written into law. The Declaration of Independence definitely excluded Africans, Native Americans, and all women. When we think about the 3/5 compromise, enslaved Blacks were counted as 3/5 of a person. All right. The Naturalization Act specified only free white immigrants are eligible for naturalized citizenship. The Indian Removal Act, tens of thousands of indigenous peoples would have their land stolen and forced to move from the lands that they cultivated and practice their religion and traditions on for centuries. The Guadalupe, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that was signed between the US and Mexico, promising to protect lands, language, and culture of Mexicans living in ceded territory that is now California, Texas, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, parts of Colorado, and Wyoming. Massive land theft for Mexicans that went to bed in Mexico and woke up in the US. Then we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first time we see the word of nationality barred expressly by name, excluding Chinese individuals or people with Chinese ancestry. The Johnson-Reed Immigration Act set restrictive quotas on immigrants from Asia, Africa, Latin America. And then, the Japanese of internment Americans, where over 120,000 men, women, and children were evacuated and confined in isolated, fenced and guarded relocation centers. Problematic about that is that over half of those evacuees were actually American citizens, and this timeline moves on. So when we think about the word America and its foundation, if you scramble those letters, it spells out I am race. And this foundation of exclusion and dehumanization continued to follow us over time. Understanding the foundational underpinnings in which advantage and supremacy were codified into law, there's an ideology that followed, shaped by a culture that ascribed to pseudoscience of race, assigning traits, value, and position, hierarchy based on skin color. Race is not biologically real. However, it has shown up in real, very real, and harmful impacts to those folks who consider themselves as Black, brown, and culturally colorful. And it is within this culture that I just showed you that brief snapshot of a timeline where people with decision-making power thought that healthcare atrocities that were okay. So the dominant and false narratives that aligned with stereotypes and emerged allowed dehumanizing practices to take place without much accountability. Gynecological experimentation on Black women, medical institutions using racialized anatomy as foundations for learning, the years of forced sterilization of Latinx women and later the mass sterilization of Native American women, Tuskegee experiment upon Black men and impacts to their children and families for years to come, the HeLa cells, eugenics, et cetera, just to name some. Generations of stories have been passed down around the mistrust of US systems to include government and our healthcare and medical systems due to this lingering of history that we carry with us in our minds and in our bodies and in our stories. It also shows up in our data. With that foundation rooted in historical context and truth, we can make visible the racial arrangement that we have all inherited. And while the Jim Crow signs may have come down, the racial order indeed has stayed intact. And it shows up in our current structures. And it shows up in how we're positioned in our human hierarchy. And it shows up in our data and our outcomes. Where do we fall on this spectrum as we explore ourselves and our history and our families and how we came into this arrangement? James Baldwin says that history is not the past, it is the present, and that we carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we are literally criminals. And to build upon that, our history connects us to the unconscious, the implicit associations that we harbor in our subconscious that cause us to have feelings and attitudes about people based on characteristics like race, ethnicity, age, and appearance. And these associations or bias are developed over a course of lifetime, beginning at a very early age, with both the direct and indirect messages that constantly sway around us. None of us are immune to bias. It is the air we breathe and the water we swim. And the things that influence our bias are attached to history that have formed and shaped societal culture, narratives, and norms. The way that we personally have internalized these narratives and beliefs, the way that we interact with other people, and how those power dynamics play out, and then institutional and structural practices that reinforce biases, all of which have historic roots and influence our systems because people uphold and perpetuate practices, policies, and norms. Systems change then requires people to change at the most transformational level. And as we're talking about these systems, let's look at these different systems that we are all swimming in. When we think about the social economic status, we have racial wealth gap. When we think of housing, we have a home ownership gap. When we think of school and education, there's an achievement gap. Our food systems are dealing with food apartheid, also known as food deserts and or swamps. Criminal justice system, disproportionate minority contact, and our health systems have health disparities. What's problematic is that all of these are caused by racial inequities. All of these systems are working to eliminate those racial inequities. However, our systems are typically siloed, and silos hold innovation hostage. The truth is, we can't do this alone, and that everyone has a hand in making sure that we are being equitable in our approach, and thus making change that is transformational for the people that are living within these systems and dealing with the difference of access and opportunities. And as we think about this water of SUPREMA-SEA, we have to understand that our health and well-being is impacted by the intersection of all of these. That water doesn't know any boundaries. It flows and goes in between. And all of these things exist within zip codes that were created by government-sanctioned policies across the country that segregated our neighborhoods and now result in zip codes that have 10 years of a life difference. You have a 10-year difference between the length of life you have depending on where you live. So we have to ask, why? And as we think about racial disparities and inequities, they have been a long-standing challenge. However, racism is not a separate dimension of power. It is all about power imbalance. It runs through all aspects of our society, and it has been the most historically successful in othering and categorizing humans, which is why it's critical to lead with race explicitly, but not exclusively, with an understanding that any intervention or solution that challenges structural racism also challenges relations of power within other forms of oppression used to maintain that power. And that these overlapping systems can create overlapping barriers for people who are dealing with multiple social identities, both seen and unseen. And if our inequities are rooted in injustice that is historic and has traveled throughout time to become current, then to approach equity means we need justice to be at the forefront. That equity as both a process and an outcome require us to take action, to repair, and to acknowledge the injustice that has been done, and to be creative about how we move forward from this history to our story. Now, the slide before this that I just showed you was a visual representation of what Dr. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, an American lawyer, civil rights advocate, philosopher, has coined intersectionality. And intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorization such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So while it is important to address all types of oppression, if we're not addressing race at the root, then we're going to be missing a lot of the narrative, a lot of the story, and a lot of solutions that will be helpful for everyone to thrive. Now, throughout my career, I've worn several hats, and as a health educator and fitness instructor, I enjoyed motivating people towards healthier behaviors. And I would often say to my clients and participants, the actions we take start with the thoughts that we make. Why is this change important, and how are we thinking about approaching this change? And like any change that requires attending to your current and long-standing habits and your thoughts and ways of being that you've become comfortable with over time, you will feel some discomfort initially when your deeply held beliefs are challenged. Just like you will when you get sore when you first start working out or lifting weights or running or taking walks. But I believe that if it can challenge you, it can change you. Practice makes progress, and progress leads to permanence. Perfection is inequitable and it's inhuman. And just as I believe that we must transform our minds to transform our bodies, I believe in the wise words of longtime Detroit activist Grace Lee Boggs that we must transform ourselves to transform the world. Moving from transactional towards transformation requires trust. Trust demands truth and transparency. Only the truth will set us free. Again, as I had said earlier, our liberation is bound. So I'm going to end our time right now with some invitations and intentions that you may take and leave as you feel necessary or helpful. First, you may have feelings, and that's okay. It is human. Unfortunately, we are often told to leave our emotions at the door, and we're not socialized to explore our racial and social identities that may bring up feelings. And we don't typically prioritize self-reflection as a standard. So feel free to notice and or validate your feelings and emotions and tensions and jot them down. Those things are information and education. Do not disconnect from your discomfort. Sit in it, explore why you feel this way, and learn more about yourself, because deepening relationship with yourself is helpful for deepening relationships with others. And that is critical for normalizing humanity. Also take care of yourself as needed. Remember, discomfort leads to discovery. This may or may not be the beginning of your journey, and it definitely won't be the end. The work of anti-racism, anti-oppression, equity, and justice is a journey, and it's full of twists, turns, pivots, falling, failing forward until eventually you fly. And you don't have to fly alone. You can fly together. You are part of a collective. You are contributing. Small is the all, and small is a reflection of the large. That's what Adrienne Maree Brown tells us. And so it's okay if you're taking small steps, and that you're leaning into your curiosity, and that you continue to exploring beyond this session. Exploration is education. We can assume and we can hope that people have good intentions, but it is the impact that matters most. What's the result of your good intentions? Because it won't always align with impact of our interactions or impact of our interventions and solutions to human problems. Just because I didn't mean to roll over your foot with a grocery cart doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And that pain can actually linger. So tend to the impact always over the intent. And as you think about setting an intention or intentions that you'd like to have for the rest of your experience today, I invite you to expand beyond our socialized ways of being in terms of either or, and to embrace the both and. While you may view this glass as half empty or half full, it is in fact both half empty and half full, and occurring simultaneously. And in addition to that, I will leave you with what keeps me grounded in my own life. In a world where we center production and profit and politics over people, I invite you to be honest, to be humble, and to be human. I am sending you all love and light as you convene in community with others today on this continued revolution. May you gather many gifts of growth and not shy away from the challenges that just may change you. Resist and rock on. Power to the people. Peace. My name is Jannah Bierens. I am a racial and health equity consultant, and you can reach me at freedomforall@gmail.com. That's freedom with a PH and 3 E's, freedom4all@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Jannah, for first acknowledging the land that you occupy, for setting a foundation for today's session, and for naming some invitations and intentions. Don't forget to follow along with today's event on our social media channels. Handles are listed on the slide and on today's materials. With any questions or support needed throughout the day, you can reach us at adolescenthealth@umich.edu. We are now going to take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 12:52 p.m. Eastern Time for a session on the impact that historical and structural racism has on adolescent health outcomes by J. Mag Carbia. Thank you.